Today I'd like to continue our journey through chapter 15 of the Gospel of Matthew. We've been looking at the early section in chapter 15, where Jesus is talking about the tradition of the elders and gets into an interesting discussion about tradition and the importance of tradition and how sometimes these traditions that we have evolved really take us away from focusing on God and the things of God. We notice the Pharisees and the scribes are sort of attacking Jesus about this issue of the washing of the hands by the apostles, and Jesus is pointing out really more significant things that the Pharisees and scribes are kind of overlooking in a way. So in verse 6, he says how the Pharisees and the scribes have said that you need not honor your father, and doing this you have nullified the word of God for the sake of your tradition. So what they were saying is you need not honor your mother and father in this specific circumstance. The money that should go to them can really go to the altar of God, and when it gets to the altar of God, sometimes it waylays itself to other areas of the religious establishment. So it seemed like a financial dispute was underlying this. How much should we give to the religious authorities, and how much should we give to our own mother and father who might be in need? And Jesus is saying, you really have to honor your mother and father. That's the most important thing. So in verse 7, Jesus says, well, hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy about you when he said, this people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And this, I think, is always the challenge for us today. Do we just honor God with our lips? We use that colloquialism, lip service. Do we just say to God, God, I love you, God, you're my priority, but then in our actions, we take a completely different route. And this is what Jesus seems to be pointing towards here in Matthew 15. And so the exact prophecy that Jesus is pointing to from Isaiah is Isaiah chapter 29, verse 13. And the Lord said, since this people draws near with words only, and honors me with their lips alone, though their hearts are far from me, and their reverence for me has become routine observance of the precepts of men. So this danger that Isaiah points out is a real challenge, I think, to all of us. Are we really giving our hearts to God? Or are we just kind of maybe sort of routinely following certain precepts that men and women have evolved over the years, and we call it tradition? We must follow the tradition. We must do things the way we always did them, do them in rote fashion, do them as a routine. Many spiritual writers will even point out in terms of our receiving the Eucharist. Can it become a routine for us? For some it might be a daily routine, for some a weekly routine, for some a monthly routine, but the emphasis here is on the heart. Are we truly following God with our heart? Are we giving our heart to God? Are we expressing our love for God? When I come to receive the Eucharist, am I thinking about putting on a fashion show or display, or pointing out to people how wonderful I am because I go to Mass and my heart is not with God? It's in these other circumstances and transitional and transitory things that do not last. Do I really have this deep passion and love for God? And is that why I come to Eucharist? And is that why I receive Eucharist? Because I love God. Because I want to grow closer to God, and I want to grow in my love for my sisters and brothers. In verse 9, Jesus says, in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines human precepts. So again, this is the challenge. We look at our doctrines and we say, well, is this just a human precept? Or is it something that is from God? We speak about this in terms of our own theology. We use the term the hierarchy of truths. Those truths which are certainly more important and more significant in other truths and doctrines and traditions that might have evolved, could have some really good points to them and could be wonderful in many ways, but are they the most significant truths? Are they really what I should be following with my whole heart? Or are they kind of minor things? We speak of it, for example, with regard to the language at Mass. People get all upset. Well, the Mass should be in Latin. It was always in Latin. It was in Latin for many years. And of course, we conveniently forget that the first Mass was not in Latin. It was in Aramaic. That the Church's liturgy was in Greek for many years and then evolved into the language of the people, which at that time was Latin, so people could participate in the liturgy. And then when Latin no longer became the language of the people, although it is, of course, still the official language of the Roman Catholic Church, people said, well, maybe we should make this in the language of the people so the people can participate, because liturgy involves people's participation. We don't just go to Mass to hear Latin or to watch a priest. We go to Mass to participate, to let God know that God is our priority, that we love God and we come together to worship God. And so naturally, being in the language of the people in that sense is important, so people can fully and meaningfully participate in the liturgy by using language that is familiar with them, that they know very well. But the point is, do we get that concern kind of confused with, well, what is the message of the gospel? The message of the gospel is to love God and love others, and the message of the gospel is not to go to a Latin Mass. And so we have to be careful. Jesus is saying here, do we teach as doctrines human precepts? I mean, these are human precepts that have evolved over the years in terms of liturgy and language. That certainly can be very helpful, can bring us together as a community. But do we confuse the human precepts with the worship of God and giving our life to God and acting on our relationship with God by loving our sisters and brothers? So Jesus then says in verse 10, he summoned the crowd and said to them, hear and understand. Interesting how it's phrased. Hear, but also understand. Don't just hear the words, understand them, understand the meaning. Go a little bit deeper here. Don't just stay on the surface and just hear, understand. And in verse 11, then Jesus says, it is not what enters one's mouth that defiles that person, but what comes out of the mouth is what defiles one. Jesus again speaking about the food issue that the Pharisees and scribes have raised. The disciples of Jesus are not washing their hands in the proper way before they eat, according to the Pharisees and scribes. So they're not following the laws with regard to the eating. Jesus says, well, eating is certainly important. We need to sustain our lives. But is it truly eating that defiles a person? You're taking in some food and you're saying that that's unclean. Is that truly defiling a person? No, Jesus says what truly defiles someone is those words that come out of my mouth. When I attack others, when I put them down, maybe it's a racist remark, maybe it's something that shows my prejudice against another person. Maybe it's hateful speech. Those are what truly defile a person. It's not the type of food I eat. And of course, Jesus, being an observant Jew, would say that that is a concern. Certainly, we have to follow the Jewish dietary laws, but to make that the priority over our speech and how we speak about others, Jesus says, no, wait a minute. I think you've got your priorities wrong here. What comes first is that speech. That speech that, number one, gives praise to God for all we've been given, and number two, lifts up, elevates our sisters and brothers, and lets them know that they truly are loved by us and by God, that we want to bring them closer to God. That becomes then the priority. We can follow those other laws, and they can be helpful to us, yes, but do not lose sight of what comes first, Jesus is saying. And what is it that truly defiles a person? Certainly something good for those who were the audience for Jesus to hear and understand, but even, I think, more important for us today, to hear and understand that message of Jesus, to refrain from hate speech, to refrain from defiling others and ourselves by that type of speech.